Hello and welcome to tonight's screening and Q&A on the LA Rebellion with Julie Dash, Bryant Griffin, and Kitty Who. My name is LeRonn Brooks and I'm the curator of the African American Art History Initiative here at the Getty Research Institute. Please, the applause don't stop. You can just... Yeah. As part of the J. Paul Getty Trust, the Getty Research Institute, which is the building far over here, just on the campus, is an international research center with a vast library, special collections, and an array of programs committed to preserving, creating, and sharing resources related to the history of art. Through its public programming, the GRI welcomes a multitude of audiences to engage with and be inspired by art and its varied histories. Before we begin, a word of thanks to everyone involved in bringing this event to you this evening: Janini Subramanian and Lauren Artis from the GRI Public Programming Team, David Rue from Events, and of course, David Rue, and of course the AV team. Thank you guys. I'd also like to thank Julie, Bryant, and Kitty for being here tonight. Thank you. And our co-presenters, the PBS at PBS SoCal, as well as Artbound and the UCLA Film and Television Archive for their support. Thank you. Tonight's screenings will be followed by a conversation with myself, Julie, Bryant, and Kitty, as well as a Q&A where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And as a quick reminder, please silence your cell phones really quick for the duration of the program. But on to the program. Tonight's screening will begin with Julie Dash's short film from 1975, For Women, followed by the Emmy-winning episode of PBS's Artbound. The Emmy-winning. Episode of PBS's Artbound, LA Rebellion, a Cinematic Movement. The LA Rebellion emerged out of UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television following the Watts Uprising of 1965. This group of Black, Asian, Chicano, and Native American artists developed revolutionary styles that upended Hollywood's restrictive representation of minorities at the time. The episode was directed by Bryant and Kitty, and we welcome you tonight to witness it with us again if you haven't already seen the film. The program is part of the GRI's ongoing Art on-Screen series, the inaugural program for Black Visions, Film as Archive. Supporting the GRI's African American Art History Initiative, or as we call it, AHI, Black Visions features films by Black directors and artists that center around ideas of memory, history, and documentation, and investigative filmmaking's function as an archival practice. Now, a little more about the speakers. Julie Dash. Applause, please. Julie Dash. Thank you for being here, Julie. These bios are just so short, but understand that there's more. Julie Dash is a director, writer, producer, praised for her 1991 film, Daughters of the Dust. Cheers. It received the Excellence in Cinematography Award following its Sundance premiere. She's a foundational member of the LA Rebellion and the first African-American woman to have a wide theatrical release for a feature film. 1991. In addition to the numerous networks and projects she's been involved in, her work has been widely exhibited in museums such as the African American Museum in Philadelphia and the Charles H. Wright Museum in Detroit. Also an educator, she's the Diana King Endowed Professor in the Department of Art and Visual Culture at Spelman College in Atlanta. Kitty Hu is the co-director of LA Rebellion, a cinematic movement, and an Emmy, we're going to say Emmy-winning. That's because that's the rest of their lives. The rest of their lives, they get to say Emmy-winning. Emmy-winning queer Chinese documentary filmmaker. She's a co-founder of Shoes Off Media, a production company focused on telling stories that from underrepresented communities, made by those within the community. As the daughter of immigrants, Kitty's work amplifies character-driven stories that reflect the work of our social movements, looking at topics like labor, housing, culture, migration, and climate. Bryant Griffin is the second co-director for tonight's film. He is an Emmy-winning Los Angeles-based writer-director. With an MFA in directing from UCLA, Bryant crafts character-based stories centered around marginalized and underrepresented communities. His first narrative film, Young King, is currently playing at multiple film festivals across the country. Prior to directing, Bryant spent 12 years as a visual effects artist and supervisor at Lucasfilm's Industrial Light and Magic, where he worked on over 50 feature films and television series. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. So I just want to say thank you, Brian, Kitty, Julie, for just this history, this very, very important history, and it's intergenerational. You know, it's really intergenerational. I know there are a lot of students out here, filmmaking students, who will gain a lot from just recognizing that, you know, something was made here that can also speak to them. And so I just wanted to applaud, just say, what great work. Would you want to speak about why the film?
First, I want to say thank you for hosting us, and thank you for being a part of the documentary. And it's such an honor to be on stage with Ms. Dash, so thank you so much. This was actually something that Kitty came to me with, and actually PBS SoCal as well. PBS SoCal, the program Artbound, they do stories, tell stories about the LA community, and you know, they wanted to do a story about the LA Rebellion filmmakers, and I think the genesis may have been Ben Caldwell. Ben Caldwell works really closely with Nick and Angela, who are in the audience, producers from PBS.
I feel like for us as younger filmmakers, it was also really to pay homage to the filmmakers who set this path and were dedicated and consistent in telling their community stories from their own community's voices. And for me, visual communications, like I would not be here without visual communications. The folks there really took me under their wing and taught me about ethno-communications, this community-centered way of filmmaking. And so, you know, we learned a little bit about the LA Rebellion at UCLA, but also really wanted to dig into this origin story of how it came to be. You know, we were just talking about how LA Rebellion as a term is in many ways a strategic or a political term, but the root of it was, you know, folks who, you know, like yourself, just recognized the times that we were living in and refused to bow down to what the industry or what Hollywood was demanding of us and wanted to tell their community stories.
Well, thank you for that. Julie Dash.
Thank you. Thank you for this evening and for making this film, because it just seeing the faces and the film clips and of course UCLA and the sound stages and the rooms and the bullpen, it just really takes me back, and I just didn't realize it was so long ago. I stopped counting, you know, but wow. I just feel so blessed to still be here and to have gone through that experience with all of these creatives who co-created with me. You know, my I did work with VC, Visual Communications, and like I think I mentioned to you with Steve Tatsukara there, I used to go to VC and he would help me with my budgets for my films. Bob Nakamura was my advisor, and Jorge Prelaurin was an advisor, and Billy Woodbury was my TA when I first entered in '76. Of course, I got to work with Larry Clark and Haile Garima prior to my going to UCLA. So it was for me, it was a very fulfilling moment to watch all of this and hear them speak. And, you know, and Alile is my contemporary. I was there with her. It's just amazing. Just thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Bryant and Kitty, you did a great job in terms of giving us an idea about the context for that particular moment. And so with Julie, what was it like to arrive in LA? And because it was a community that you were involved in. It just seemed like everyone was helping everyone, but there was still a struggle just for the basic means of survival as you learn these skills to be an artist, in this particular case, filmmaking. And what was the environment like?
Well, I was coming out of New York City, and my first plane ride was to come to Los Angeles, and I actually went to AFI first. I did 2 years penitentiary. I did 2 years at AFI before going to UCLA, and while I was at AFI as a writing, producing fellow, I would drive up to UCLA, and that's how I met Larry Clark and Haile Garima and Charles Burnett, and I got to work on their film. So yeah, it was very much a community network of independent filmmakers, and also Charles Burnett. So it was a community, a learning experience, and all of these things, and just having the support. And I was so impressed by the work of Barbara McCullough, who was also there, an experimental filmmaker, and yeah, it was a very fulfilling and enriching time, but it was also a time where we didn't think about one day having to support ourselves with the films that we made. We were just making films for the cause, for the community, for our community, and wanting to tell stories about our family and the people we knew, because we certainly weren't seeing them on television.
Yeah, you know, sometimes I try to describe the world before the world back then, like you know, it's you know, so if you go back, you know, to the 1940s, that's before television, right? And you go back to that particular time, you don't see, you know, people of color on TV that way. You don't see African Americans, you don't see Chicanos, you don't see Asian Americans represented with any kind of dignity, right? And so the idea that your work is not just for you alone, but it's for a representation of a world that people don't know, right? The people outside of your community may not know, because television and film is one way that we begin to understand the ways and the cultures of the people. So more than, I think, any other art, film is one of the most powerful communication vehicles, you know, ever made, because how does one speak your humanity? How does one gather that and say, I'm an individual, so I'll speak it from a family point of view, right? Because a lot of that was like a film about the Project One, right? About you're getting your resources. Can we just describe Project One? Because there was a whole conversation backstage about the first project, if you don't understand what that was. Yeah.
Our Project One, when I was there in '76, it had to be Super 8. It had to be non-sync. And I did a short film called Diary of an African Nun, which UCLA later blew up to 35 millimeter. I didn't think that was possible, but they did. And in Project One, that's when you learn to work with your fellow students, and we worked 24 hours a day, sometimes sleeping in the bullpen on the floor in sleeping bags. But that's when I also learned that film was also kind of became like our religion. And we lived for it, and we lived, sleep, dreamed, everything. It was just everything for us, because it gave us a way of controlling the world that was around us that was so unfamiliar vis-a-vis the media and film and television, and we had stories to tell and songs to sing and poetry to present or to experiment with, like with Four Women. You know, when I explained it to them, what I wanted to do, people just kind of looked at me like, what? You know, because this was before music videos, you know, so.
Right, Getty?
No, I mean, like, in addition to what you're saying, film, I was gonna say, like, the use of Nina Simone in Four Women is just brilliant. Like, I've lived overseas a little bit, and when you live overseas, especially in places where there aren't many African Americans, media, film, and music is their first idea of who you are. And so, you know, what it means to be an other or minority, or when you visit a foreign land, you constantly have to explain your existence, which is, you know, what Reem was mentioning in the documentary as well. And so it is very powerful and very important, because again, it's always like this uphill battle that you have to fight. It's like, no, that's not all of who I am. And so again, the use of Nina Simone and Four Women, again, is just powerful.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So there was Diary of an African Nun, then Illusions, right?
Yeah.
And then Daughters of the Dust,
Yeah.
right?
It was a long time ago. I'm trying to think back. Yeah, because I shot Diary and, did I shoot that before Four Women? I'm not sure. Yeah, Diary first, yeah, and Four Women was like in, 77, yeah.
So the momentum of that particular experience at UCLA in order to work together with people, because I know Carrie James Marshall, the painter, worked on Daughters of the Dust, right?
Yes, he also worked on, I did a dance film with the New York urban bushwomen called Praise House. Carrie James Marshall did my production design for that as well. So I had been working with him for a while.
Arthur Jafa?
Arthur Jafa, of course.
Right. And so this is what I mean by this could happen in LA, right? That you have all of these creatives who come together, but you need each other's expertise to make a singular, sort of a singular vision, right? To help you shape that narrative. And then this idea of what was starting as something very personal with that first project. Daughters of the Dust takes that, right, personal, the idea of intimacy in the world of, I guess, your own family and a lot, and it brings it to like a Toni Morrison space, almost.
Oh, thank
right?
you.
Yeah. She also worked with Alice Walker on Diaries.
That was an Alice Walker short story. But I wanted to mention, too, that in all of our films, we were working with the same talent. Like Barbara O was in Diary of an African Nun, and almost all of the actors you've seen you see in Haile Garima's and Larry Clark's film were in Daughters of the Dust. Nana Pazant and Geraldine Dunstan and the lady who played Hagar. So we were working with the same group of talent from LA. It was very much a collaborative effort, yeah.
How did you, Bryant and Kitty, how did you get all this? There's a lot of narrative here, a lot of singular narratives, singular experiences, and then you branch out to like, you know, the larger social political things happening at the time. How did you bring these narratives together?
We really wanted to start with the context to show why folks were so rooted in these types of stories and where they were coming from, both looking at UCLA as an institution and the space that it occupies, but also the larger social political context, which is, it was a time of a poly crisis, right? Overlapping crises and social movements, very much like this moment right now. And so we wanted to kind of thread that throughout the film, both looking at the 60s and 70s, but also bringing it to our current day. And the reason why Reem is also in there is because even though the ethno-communications, the Muck period is a very specific time, the ethno-communications was a very specific program, but the legacy of that movement and the way in which you all were thinking about how to make these films continues to this day. I feel like, you know, we're very much a part of that lineage. Likewise, same with Reem, speaking to where she's coming from and wanting to tell Palestinian stories in this way. And so I think that was kind of a driving North Star for us throughout this film.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was really focused on just to give you a little bit of context, is that this film we started shooting, what was it, like April of 2023, and it premiered early October 2023, so before October 7th, and obviously before the most recent elections. And so I've always been obviously fascinated with the 60s because I know how I'm a beneficiary of those struggles that previous generations have gone through. And I think as my generation being a beneficiary of their work and their sacrifice and their blood, sweat, and tears, it's really shocking to be at a moment in time in which there are people who are actively, consciously trying to push us back. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with this was to kind of make a call to protest, a call to being active. And that it oftentimes starts with the younger generations. It's usually the teenagers, early 20-year-olds, you know, who kind of make the change. And of course, like I said, when we screened this last time, there were the protests at UCLA, which it was almost like the same week or something like that. And so this repeating of this pattern, you know, again, that was one of the things, again, that I tried to infuse in there. It's like, how can we take this and make it a call to fight these negative forces? And again, the battles that your generation has fought, you know, we have to continue to fight.
And so for me, it's what does it mean to be an artist, right? What makes the artist unique? You know, working at a research library, right, that studies the history of art and through archives and through memory, what does it mean to be in a tradition of artists who actually speak to their own reality, speaks to the world, but through their own particular realities? You know, to no small degree, we are all kind of shaped by the circumstances we're born into. The other day, I told someone I'm the first generation in my family to be born outside of Jim Crow segregation. Right? My parents were raised and so it blew their mind because it wasn't that long ago, right? And so how does one respond to that? And to think about all the elements, right? Every art has their particular elements, but to think about all the elements that it goes into not only creating the narrative, but also like, what does it mean to actually make the physicality of making a film? Like backstage, we were talking about in your teaching, students, can you describe what it is to teach film to students, to undergraduates?
Well, it's very different because they're very young, and most of my students were born after 9/11. So many of them, most of them, have never even held in their hands celluloid film. And that's what we were working with at UCLA, you know, film stocks, various film stocks. And I remember we had, you know, Larry Clark and we had tested various film stocks because it was very important to us to find a film stock that was complementary to dark skin tones. And so every time I shot something, like even for women, I used Fujifilm. When we shot Daughters of the Dust, we used Agfa Javert film. But nowadays, everything is different because you have a memory card and you just shoot your film and then you shoot it raw and dial it up to what you want it to be in color grading. But going back to teaching film to younger people today, all of my students, they've been raised on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And I'm teaching them documentary film production, and many of them cannot tell the difference between a TikTok rant and, and a documentary film. And there are differences. All of the platforms are valid and okay, but when you're but documentary film has its own genre and multiple subgenres. So there's a lot of differences than when we were there learning to make films and you know ethnographic films as well. There are a lot of differences, and you mentioned something about being an artist, and I I think when I was at UCLA, we didn't consider ourselves artists. We consider ourselves, these were political acts. Every film we made was a political statement, an act to either subvert or to produce something that takes our story, our culture, our community, our families to another level. And it took a long time for me to accept the fact that when people say you're an artist, I'd go, oh God, I'm not an artist. You know, it's like so it took a long time to accept that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about you? Did you artist?
I mean, I think I agree with Julie on that. I hear that. I think there's always the argument of making art for the sake of art, which sure. But I think that when you're making a film or any sort of telling a story in some way, especially if it gets seen by someone, which is oftentimes, the point of that, you hold a responsibility to be accountable to the people that are part of the filmmaking process, that are part of the film, whose community that they come from. And so, sure, you can call me an artist, but I think it's really, I think I'm just a conduit for the stories that I have the privilege of stepping into, and I hold that with a lot of responsibility and weight to do that well.
Yeah, and I think that's, in a lot of ways, for me, sometimes that's the rub, because it's like, as a person of color, you wonder, do you ever get a chance to explore being an artist? It's like the question that we always come up against from time to time. It's like, again, not coming from a place of privilege. You understand that this may be your only chance to do something, then you do feel that weight. You do feel the weight of the work that you create, who it's going to represent, how it's going to be interpreted. And so a lot of times you kind of wonder, am I free to be an artist? Because everything is so precious. And so that's a struggle that, continuously happens. And again, that's what, hopefully the beneficiaries of someone who struggles are coming, in after people who've struggled so much. It's like, hopefully we would get that opportunity to be free. And of course, there are filmmakers and artists of color who are making political art and statements. But again, it is that struggle. How many times do we go see a film that's about a nobody that, it does nothing, but entertain, which is totally fine and valid, but in a lot of ways I would feel guilty if I did something like that.
But I think I wanted to say part of it is also, I think, what this film is speaking to, and when we were even just talking to all the folks, and especially looking at Hailey's interviews and speaking with Hailey, we were constantly reminded of what is this metric of success? Like, who are you actually trying to speak to, and what is the point of this? Because Hailey is adamant that it's not for Hollywood, it's not to go get a certain award or a trophy. Like, sure, that can help bring more attention to the piece, but to be really, really clear about that North Star, and I think Bryant and I have talked about that for years now, going through film school, of really grounding us, and I think that's what the Ethnic Communications LA Rebellion folks continue to do and to show us.
But now it's a lot easier with the memory card to to play with things and pursue art. I think it's allowed. It should be allowed.
Part of the film too was about your experience at UCLA, right? The fact that some film stock was being taken. The fact that there were things that your conduit to perfect your art form, the mistakes you had to make to learn. All of that was in a context in which the sociality of the department then was also its own thing to sort of overcome. So you're learning the craft, but then you have to learn the craft of survival in school, right? Because you're pretty much the first, to a certain degree. Like, how did you handle that?
Well, to be quite honest, every film I made at UCLA, no, except for when I was with Bob Nakamura, when he was my advisor, he was very kind. But prior to that, there were gender issues. So if I was doing 4 women, people would go like, what are you doing? What is that about? Okay. So, and illusions and the same thing. So but it was, for me, it was, I was there, I had a list of ideas that I wanted to pursue visually, and there was gonna be no stopping me, and so I did not listen to, I pushed back on all of the ew and all of that, but there was not a whole lot of support except from the professors, so what I tell my students now is, you know, when you're gonna make a film, you have to be courageous, because there are gonna be people that constantly want to tell you what film you should make and how you should make it and what it should look like, sound like, feel like, smell like, taste like, everything, because but the film is coming from you, so it has to be an expression of what you want to give voice to. That's what's important, and that's why you have to be courageous, because creativity is a very fragile thing, you know, and if you present or pitch your idea to someone and they say, oh my God, that's just awful, you know, then what do you do? And then a lot of people just like shrink back and they don't do it, but it's important to be courageous and explore, especially with a memory card.
So I think just, you know, just this one last round of questions before we open it up to the audience for questions. What advice would you give the young filmmakers here in the audience, or what would you, if there's any advice you can give them in terms of your experiences, you could say making the documentary and or your experiences as being in their position at one particular point, yeah, what would you say?
I want to hear from Ms. Dash. You guys don't want to listen to me, but I think she said it all last time. But it is being courageous, but then also in the film, it is community, especially when you don't have resources. It is a lot easier with the iPhones and everything. I shot my first narrative back in North Carolina, where a lot of my family is. And again, you get the home cooking, you get the locations, you know, and you just tell the stories. I kind of write the stories according to what my resources allow, you know. But that's for me. That's it. You know, go back to community, go back to where you feel safe and supported, because it is really tough. You know, it is tough. Everyone is trying to do their own thing, you know, and you know, that's it for me.
I was gonna also say similarly, like finding your people, but I think on top of that, also giving yourself permission. Alile and Storme speak to this, where, you know, there's not always gonna be someone who just gives you the funding or gives you the time to be able to dream or to write the script that you wanna write, and it's really on us to do that for ourselves. To actually build that into our own schedules, to allow us to sit down and be able to think about the stories that we want to tell, to think about it critically, to engage in dialogue with our community around it, and to not wait for something to happen. I think that's something that I'm still very much trying to remember, but I'm still holding on to from them as well.
Making mistakes are the best way to learn. It's the best way to learn. The mistakes that you make, and trust in your ideas and your voice, and that's about it.
Thank you, Bryant. Thank you, Kitty.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, any questions? Do we have a mic?
Hello.
Thank you. I'm a current student at UCLA's film program, and I just want to say this whole entire event was a humongous source of inspiration for me. especially Julie Dash. Your film has really inspired me. Especially, I'm an Afro-Latina filmmaker. I'm all about representation. And my biggest question is, what advice do you have to give to filmmakers that want to have representation of marginalized communities as the forefront of their art, but in this current era of politicization of DEI, what's your current advice for us moving forward?
Oh, me? Oh. Oh, well, you can't pay attention to people canceling DEI or anything like that. You have to continue and do the films that you want to. You just
Thank you.
turn the news off. You know. Oh no, you can't let anyone dictate to you that the song that you want to sing or the poetry that you want to write visually. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't like hearing that rhetoric of woke being demonized and stuff, because it's reality for a lot of us.
Ignore all of that. You have to ignore it. And just like I was saying, that there was no film idea or film that I had in progress that was fully embraced by the professors at UCLA or AFI. Nothing.
It hasn't changed.
Nothing.
Much.
And so, you know, so,
Yeah.
but I made them anyway, you know.
Yeah. And I really loved your film, Daughters of Dust. Like, I really relate to the Gula culture and hoodoo. My mother's Haitian, and your film really spoke to me, and it was lovely. And it's honestly going to inspire me for the future.
Well, thank you. But just so you know, even, you know, places like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, you know, refused to finance it because they said, oh, this film has been made 1,000 times before. And they did. You know, someone actually wrote on the screenplay that I sent to them, like, what is this? You know.
Representation is so imperative.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is, I'm up here. Hi, my name is Mark Lowe. I'm a recent graduate from USC's Film School of Cinematic Arts. I think you kind of already answered my question, but it does speak to like an issue that is top of mind for a lot of us filmmakers coming out of, you know, still in film school, coming out of film school. This idea, you know, I know for me, seeing this kind of push for a diverse body of filmmakers after, you know, the tragedy of George Floyd and, you know, all these protests in the streets, you know, it felt hopeful, you know what I mean? The efforts of, you know, the works that you guys did in the 60s and even folks that came before felt like they were kind of paying off in a way. But in this current climate, you know, there's, I think, a lot of concern that we may slide backwards, and I think a lot of us are kind of wondering, you know, how do you continue to buck against that when the cards seem to change on you?
Well, there are, you know, the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities and programs funded by the government are being shut down. So there has to be other ways of raising money to do your films, and that's going to come from, you know, like community funding, social media funding. We just have to wade through this until all of this collapses, which it will.
I like that sentiment. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for making the documentary. It was really revealing for me in terms of the kind of the spectrum of filmmakers that were involved in the LA Rebellion that I didn't know about. You know. My question has to do with distribution. You speaking about production, right? These are, you know, for a community. We want to represent, you know, but specifically, Julie, could you talk a little bit maybe about the first screenings of For Women or Diary of an African Nun? Like, where did these screenings take place? place outside of just like, okay, you know, you shoot them, your project one, you show them, and then they go into a time capsule only to be shown on YouTube many years later, right? Like these things become things for the future, which is quite beautiful in some sense, right? Their distribution has yet to be, or is now, perhaps, in some sense. But literally at the time, to complete the circuit of the for us, by us kind of rhetoric, like were there, you know, festival circuits, or was it in people's living rooms or churches? So where were they screened, and for whom?
Okay, so these films began to be in distribution back then, and they still are. They went to Women Make Movies, Third World Cinema, California Newsreel, museums, community centers, libraries, universities, colleges. All of my films have been in distribution from that time till today.
Wow.
There are, when we think of distribution, I think everyone's thinking of the local theater or something like that, or streaming, Netflix or Prime. Those at Hulu, those are outlets, but there are other outlets as well.
Right.
And there was never a time when my films, even the little 10-minute or 2-minute, 3-minute films, there was never a time when my film was not in distribution. And then we have to think broadly. We're always thinking domestically. There are international venues, the British Film Institute. There's the Tate, yes, and museums in this country and around the world. They show films constantly. So make your films. Don't be shy about making films thinking you're not going to get distribution, because you're not making the film to you. The first person you have to please in making a film is yourself. You know, a lot of people make films they're going to sell to this place, to that place. There's no guarantees. So you have to please yourself first. You have to make the film that you want to make, and then you go from there. And you will get distribution. There are so many different resources to go to.
That's great. And I would actually like to, if I could have a part two to the question, it would be to you, Kitty, about your production, but in terms of perhaps, which may have been something not mentioned in the documentary, about like third world newsreel, right? A history of alternative distribution outlets that would have been operating at that time, right? And still continue to operate now, you know, but I was wondering if that, if in terms of as a model, you know, Kitty, did you have a knowledge of those alternative, you know,
yes, I did.
distribution? Yeah. I was curious about Kitty as a producer,
Because that's part of the community, the networking community that we talk about when we say making our films as a collaboration. I always knew there was Women Make Movies in New York. I knew there was Third World Cinema in New York. Mm-hmm. I knew there was California Newsreel. Right. And there have been distribution companies that have been in existence and went out of the existence over the years, but from the 1970s on, there are outlets. Okay. And now there's Canopy. Now you could stream it yourself, but you have to think in terms of colleges and universities, because their collection and development departments, they will buy 2 prints or 2 DVDs or whatever you have, because they put one into research, reserve, and the other is in circulation. So whatever you make, you're gonna, to each college or university, you're gonna sell 2. And that's colleges and universities around the world.
And there's definitely more that we didn't include in the film, like, VC is an example in which they formed and they did more of the grassroots community screenings, and same with Ben Caldwell. He formed Chaos, and that's still here to this day in Leimert Park, and he's worked with numerous artists, and folks like Ava DuVernay have stepped in there and talked to him about how they navigated that. And then there's also Moctezuma actually when he talks about like this is show business, he realized and decided to actually go pursue distribution as a form of money making as part of his filmmaking practice. So really literally thinking about buying out theater chains, or how do you start your own theater chain, thinking about how do you start your own distribution company. So they all kind of approached it from very different ways. And we tease it a bit in the film, and there's pieces that allude to, you know, curators and how it went to certain museums, and that was one way in which more attention was brought to the films. But yeah, there's so much more to that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dee Dee Casimir, and went to Howard for undergrad, and I just got my MFA from LMU's film program. And one thing that I was very intentional about going back to school after years of being out, and one thing I noticed was at UCLA, they really used the LA Rebellion. It's interesting because you guys were in it, and then it's like now this whole branding thing, but the school really uses that as a branding tool to recruit students. And I was telling my friend Adrian, I was like, you know, I have a girlfriend who's there now, and she absolutely hates it. And yeah, she not here right now. And one of the things that she was like, yeah, like they really use that as a way to get me to the school. And then I got there, and it was nothing like that. There's one black professor, they treat her like trash, to the point where some semesters she's there, some semesters she's not. But I actually had a good experience at LMU. Half of my program was not only black, but black women, which is an anomaly. But LMU is also not seen as the same standard as the AFI, the USC, NYU, UCLA. But a lot of students were going to film school, and it's actually an incredibly isolating experience. But they're kind of being scammed into being, you know, otherwise. So one was curious if you guys were even aware that they were using you guys as a recruiting tool, and then, you know, you go to the school and it's like, wait, none of our films are even here. And then perhaps any advice to students who go and they really struggle being the only black student. I have a friend at NYU right now, he's the only black man. There's then 2 black women, and he can't even get people to DP his films. So his first year thesis, he had to DP himself because there was an Asian student who was going to DP it, and they decided to be the DP to a white student whose father was the head of a big popular production company. So it's like, while it's almost in a way, it's like we can create our own LA Rebellion, there's actually not even anyone to do it with.
Interesting. Oh, confidentially, when I was watching the movie, I was thinking how Alile and I used to sit on the couch and talk about how much we hated UCLA. We hated the experience. We hated the professors. We had one we called the Hawk, Professor Hawkins. We had another one that we just had nicknames for all of them. We did love to show me Gabrielle, who showed us the foreign films and, you know, the film and social change. We hated the whole experience. We felt we were being tormented and tortured, but we still produced. And now we don't hate it. But I don't know what the situation is with your friend. It could be, you know, something very, very different. But as I mentioned before, there were gender issues that were not even talked about back then. I didn't go in the 60s, I was there in the late 70s, but there were gender issues. There were all kind of issues. And sometimes it's very painful. And I also mentioned that creativity could be very fragile when you're trying to build something emotionally in your mind and write about it, and people are telling you, well, that's stupid, you know? So it's not an easy path to take. So you have to nurture yourself and build confidence in yourself and know that you're going to produce what you want to produce, irregardless of what's happening around you.
And yeah. What Haile Jarima said, like, you know, we graduate into a desert, they graduate into an industry. Do you almost feel like, in a way, because I went to an HBCU for undergrad, so, you know, going to a PWI for a master's is very different. Do you almost feel like the experience that black students are having, or just non-white students are having at MFAs, do you almost feel like that's kind of what we're getting ourselves into afterwards, considering his quote?
Although I've made one feature film, theatrical feature film, 33 years ago. and I've never had the opportunity to do another theatrical feature. I've done episodics, I've done television commercials, I've done music videos, I do make films for museums, but I've never gotten another feature film that I didn't make on my own. And you know, how many times could you raise that much money? So I'm saying all that to say he's not lying. Haile Garima's not lying when he said that we graduated into a desert. But we still work. And we teach, you know, and we make films.
Thank you.
This is a question for Miss Dash. I really enjoyed your film, and my question is more so related to the production design that you use for your films, and I was wondering what your philosophy is on making production design that not only feels authentic and lived in, but also adds to the story, even with such limited resources.
That's kind of the beauty and the joy of creativity and creating, is you want your films to have resonance, and you want to create stories by creating visual metaphors. And you do that by having very precise and particular production design, management of your color palette, as well as costuming. So, you know, I love creating those kind of things and working with very creative people and knowing when to stay in my lane when it comes to design. So I've been blessed to be able to work with Kerry James Marshall and Michael Kelly Williams and of course Arthur Jaffa, who shot many things, and the ones he's known for the best is Daughters of the Dust. So I always think of it as kind of a major collaboration between the director of photography, myself, and production design, even when I'm working on television shows or television movies. And I don't make broad decisions without, you know, consulting with them and bringing them in and always having them a part of location meetings and scouting and talking about how to elevate an idea, how to elevate the visual rhetoric with design, costumes, and the color palette.
Thank you.
I think we'll have just two more, and then we'll just.
I wanted to ask you back. You were UCLA when Akubabu was running around UCLA, but there was two concepts. Lou Gossett had brought out about 40 years ago that if we take our films to the churches on Sunday, we got a built-in audience, and they would pay. Did anyone ever rise to the occasion to develop that concept? Obviously not, but do you remember when that was put into the air for someone to pick up?
Well, I know back in the 1920s, Alois Gist used to take her films and show them in churches, and Spencer Williams. And I wasn't at UCLA when Babu was there. I met him when he was doing the Pan-African Film Festival.
Right.
But I was actually at UCLA in the 70s, late 70s, so they had already gone. I think that that's an idea, that concept that can be pursued, but you want to get maximum, I guess, you want more people than one church session to see it. I think that was an idea that could be useful as part of a distribution plan, but not a total one. Mm-hmm.
So one more question, anyone?
Sorry. Hi, my question is for Ms. Dash as well as Kitty and Brian, and it's just, I would like to know what inspires each of you creatively today.
What inspires you creatively today?
Oh, what inspires me? I have a ton of stories still to tell. And this is something that I talk about with to my students. I tell them to, to create files of ideas of things that you'd like to pursue. What keeps you up at night? What makes you happy? What do you find beautiful? What makes you sad? What are the headlines in the news that you'd like to pursue, and tell that story a little bit better? What poetry, what's the music that you hear? What do you think of when you smell a certain scent of perfume? There are just so many different ways you could pull from the world around you, and memories of family stories and ideas. There's no lack of ideas. Like when people come into a class and say, oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do. It's like, don't you have a booklet? Don't you journal? Well, if not, please begin. Just write things down, and and pursue those things that make your heart beat. They make.
I have a very chaotic notes app that I just continue to write down. I'll give a very concrete one. I had the privilege of watching Nickel Boys recently, and I think it's absolutely such a stunning film, both cinematically but also storytelling-wise, and mixes across forms of documentary and fiction and experimental even in their montages. And so if you haven't seen it, I really recommend it, as just, I think it's going to sit with me as a piece of inspiration. So.
Yeah, I would echo everything. It's about, I'm a daydreamer. I think I've always been a daydreamer. I was like I kind of grew up in Brooklyn, and when it was a little bit dangerous, and so the safest place to be was like inside the daydream. But again, for me, it's like the ideas of what if, and so my mind is always asking what if, and so the what ifs tend to turn into stories, and so I always just write the ideas down.
And I would add to that, nothing's innocent. The things that you do every day, the things that fascinate you, the things that you find you're constantly doing, just because it may not seem productive doesn't mean it can't be something you can't get into, right? So nothing's innocent.
Thank you.
But I'll also add for Bryant, he says he daydreams, but he incredibly, religiously studies the work of those he admires. Like every time I'm at his place, he has booklets of past lives, like the full script, but has annotations, or has access to so many different, not just the mainstreaming platforms, but different ways to watch films and works that he really likes. So he really studies what he likes as well, and I've always really admired that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.